so that we can begin with an outstanding session that we all were waiting for. The time has come to dive into the transformative impact of responsible sourcing, sustainability, and ESG in the jewelry industry. And now I would like to invite on the stage our moderator, Mr. John Mulligan, to please take over the mic. Sustainable Commission President.
Thank you, everybody. Could my fellow panelists please come to the stage? I'll introduce you once you're on stage, if you don't mind, so please come and take your seats. You're here. You've got you then. It's always difficult to reconvene after the break, but please, for those of you out there, either close the doors or could you please come in and listen to this illustrious panel. Okay, in the interest of time, and we do have time for hopefully a discursive conversation, but in the interest of time, I'm going to give very brief introductions to this illustrious panel. If I was to give you their full profiles and go through the CVs, it would take all day. It's a very impressive set of participants. So first of all, I would like to introduce Edward Asscher, almost needs no introduction, of the Royal Asscher Diamond Company, but also the Vice Chairman of the Responsible Jewellery Council. We have Professor Alba Cappellieri, who is Head of Jewellery and Accessories at the Politecnico di Milano. We have Iris van der Veken, who is the Executive Director of the Watch and Jewellery Initiative 2030. You've already met Feriel, but Feriel Zerouki, President of the World Diamond Council. Melanie Grant is Executive Director of the Responsible Jewellery Council. And last but not least, I'm going to keep grouping them together, apologies, you have Helen Mitchell and John Key, who are ESG advisors to CIBJO. My name is John Mulligan, and I am the Market Relations Director and Climate Change Lead at the World Gold Council, but I also preside over the Sustainable Development Commission at CIBJO, and it is really my honor to be here. I have been to India quite a few times. I've never been to Jaipur, and what an amazing city it is. So I thank, like everybody else, I thank Dr. Cappellieri, I thank Pramod, I thank Steve and the team for this opportunity. It really is a pleasure. Now, this is a fairly large panel, and so it's going to be, I want to try and avoid being too much of question-answer. Inevitably, that will be the case, but if anybody has any points to raise, please just raise your hand, and we'll try and have some kind of conversation. Now, I'm going to start this by framing the conversation on ESG and sustainability from my own personal perspective, but I think it reflects, frankly, that also of CIBJO and hopefully many of the panelists here. And that is that I'd like to suggest that the jewelry supply chain will likely need, and in fact needs now, to move beyond responsible sourcing. It needs to consider wider social and environmental, what I call externalities. These big issues facing society, reshaping consumer expectation, reshaping investment flows. I think the jewelry industry is based on discretionary spending, and therefore that's a matter of choice and a matter of trust to some extent. So it needs to address how to reassert trust in supply chains, but also in its wider impacts. Now, that's my hypothesis, and I'm going to test it with the panelists. I'd like to start by Iris, I think the Watch and Jewellery Initiative has, if you like, sought to address some of these issues. It sought to address the kind of big challenges, focusing on climate, nature, inclusivity. It just so happens that both Iris and I think several people in this room were in New York just a few weeks ago for New York Climate Week, for the UN General Assembly, and several UN Global Compact meetings. Iris, I thought, first of all, it's good for a kind of stock take. Where are we? On the SDGs, the global framework for sustainable development, on the SDGs, it was announced there that we're only 15% along the pathway to progress, meaning there's 85% to go to reach those goals by 2030. That's a long way, and it really signposts the challenge and the substantial change that is needed. Do you want to comment on that and what your experience of that forum was?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that I'm very happy to be here in Jaipur, the Pink City, and also in incredible India. And I'd like to thank, of course, CIBJO for hosting us. And I'm also very excited to be with these wonderful panelists. So indeed, maybe to go back, I think it's always important. It was referenced a few times in the speeches of the different people this morning. First of all, in 2015, for the first time, there was a 2030 agenda negotiated by 193 countries. So actually, for the first time, governments agreed what sustainability means and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And it actually is an action plan of the world of leaving no one behind, dignity for all. And what happened actually 2 weeks ago at the UN was, okay, where are we with these goals? And actually, the results are daunting. First of all, we are not on track. And of course, the COVID-19 pandemic had an impact, the triple crisis of climate, biodiversity, and pollution, and also the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And we see now that people living in extreme poverty is higher than it was 4 years ago, that hunger has gone back at 2005 levels, and that gender equality, ladies and gentlemen, gender is 300 years away. So the ambition is too low. And just on that last point on gender, I think in an industry that is so influenced by women and in the consumer behavior, I think we need to really double down the commitment. So the first point I want to mention, John, is we're not on track. The second point that was mentioned is fundamental changes are needed, and it will take partnerships, and that's the theme of today. So I don't want to go too much into detail because I would like to hear the thoughts of my fellow panelists. But I think everyone agrees that sometimes people think, but you know, it's so far away from my bed, this 2030 agenda. But it's not. Because what do we want when we look at our factories? We want people that have decent labor. We want to use safe chemicals. We want to have a safe space to work and function. So I think it's really important that each one of us is busy every day on the 2030 agenda, but we need more ambition. And finally, what the Secretary General asked, and also Sandao Hambo, as CEO of the Global Compact, is she said, what I'm asking is that every industry leader should step up. So we'll need systematic change, and that will require technology, different kinds of partnerships. And of course, that brings me also to the Watch and Jewellery Initiative 2030, which was actually founded on that partnership model by Kering and Cartier, actually two competitors coming together to ask companies to action on biodiversity, on climate, and on inclusiveness, with a big focus on going deeper into human rights, labor, and diversity. So for a nutshell, we're not on track, so we need to be more ambitious, and more than ever, we need to work together.
Thank you. And the fact that we're so far away from our targets, our goals, I think should be at the forefront of everybody's mind, because sometimes these things can seem distant. I work in climate change and biodiversity, and for some people that's a problem elsewhere. What will happen very soon, and we're seeing it with extreme events, we're seeing it with changes in local economies, migration, etc., it will affect your supply chains. It will actually have a very significant impact on you unless you start to build resilience. So I'm saying this because I heard a comment about, we shouldn't push too hard. I would say that we have no choice but to push harder. So I just wanted to kind of reassert the urgency of action that is needed. I'd like to go back to a kind of almost the title of this and a question about definitions. A question of, you know, we talk about sustainability, we talk about, I mentioned the difference between moving towards external issues, sustainability in the broader sense, and the responsible sourcing, and people use other phrases, CSR, etc. Feriel, do you have any kind of position or perspective on where one starts and where one ends, or whether it's a continuum? Just how do we define the definitions and the boundaries of our action?
Thanks, John. You know, I think the topic of sustainability is extremely complex for everybody to grasp, and most of the time people fear what they don't understand. When we started looking at how people were talking about sustainability, this was just before COVID hit, we noticed that in marketing campaigns, a lot of brands, a lot of retailers, consumer-facing companies were using responsible sourcing, ethical sourcing, sustainable sourcing interchangeably. And we did quite a lot of research back then to understand what is the legal definition, are there standards around it, and what should the definition be within our industry. And we actually took this dilemma to Gaetano Cappellieri and said, look, under the CIBJO umbrella, we're talking about jewellery. So it's not just diamonds, it's every single material that goes into this beautiful product that consumers wear. And can we start this important conversation under the CIBJO umbrella? And where we landed a few years later, and this is, I'm going to try and simplify it, but responsible sourcing is the baseline. It's basically do no harm. Okay, it's meet international law, do no harm. You're working with your suppliers to do no harm. Ethical sourcing builds on that, and it adds on social aspects. So be kind and good to your employees. Be kind and understand your suppliers. Understand the culture. Understand the lens that they're working through. That's a second building block. So you start with responsible sourcing, you move up in your journey to ethical sourcing, ethical behavior. And then sustainability is at the top. Sustainability builds on these two platforms in order to ensure long-term longevity in all of your social, environmental, and responsible sourcing behavior. With this baseline thought of using what you need today without impacting the needs of the future generations. And so here you talk about climate change, you talk about resource depletion, you talk about water, you set goals to minimize your impact, to leave the planet as good as possible for our children and their children's children. So this is quite simple. If we agree on these three levels, we also agree on a journey of continuous improvement. People understand where to start, when they get there, where to go, and then where they should be in the future. I'm totally surprised about the impact, about what you mentioned, Iris, that we're only 14% there. I think it's also because people don't understand. People are not measuring what they do. People are not, so then we talk about ESG. Again, everyone is using everything interchangeably. ESG is, in its most basic format, reporting, data, so that people can assess how you, as a business or as an industry, are doing in terms of your sustainable impact, and compare it with others in the supply chain or with other industries. And I am with Iris on this one. I don't think we need to be competing on issues of sustainability. The Sustainable Development Goals came after the Millennium Development Goals. The initial ones were focused only on the developing world. This set focuses on all of us. We all have a role to play. People, organizations, NGOs, governments, developing, makes no difference. So if we're competing on that front, we're not going to get anywhere. So let's agree on the nomenclature. Let's agree on the ESG format so that we can understand how to actually report and where you can't know where you're doing bad if you're not measuring your impact, so that you can focus on where you need to be better. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And I'm absolutely with you that this has to be convergent. It has to be collaborative. This is not necessarily an opportunity for competitive advantage. You might find that along the way, but actually you have to converge, agree your goals. Iris, I think you...
No.
Yeah.
Well, I think, over 20 years in the industry has advanced, and originally it was the mining houses that pushed that agenda. I think the risk is also, if we as an industry don't get our act together, first of all, we're going to confuse the consumer. That's very dangerous, and the consumer might make other choices, but the regulators are accelerating. And I think if you look at the European Green Deal, and if you look at the Corporate Social Responsibility Directive, some companies say, no, it doesn't affect me as a small enterprise. It does, because you will be maybe supplying to a bigger brand, to a bigger company, and they will look at the extended value chain on what responsibility means. So this means is that, we need to start the journey, and it is a journey. I agree with that also, so step by step. But I heard earlier about the colored gemstones. I agree it's 90% artisanal, but I do not agree with not stepping up. It's time to become more transparent also, and just as we did with diamonds, it took a lot of time, but it's the journey that matters.
Thanks. Melanie, I was just about to ask you a question, and you can certainly jump in, but maybe...
Can everyone hear me?
Go on, and you go first.
I'm quite loud usually, so
they can hear you.
Anyone at the back can tell me to pipe down. I just wanted to just jump into this conversation. I think it's really interesting, and coming in as a journalist, really, coming in from a slightly different angle, storytelling, I think, will play a big part in creating desire. This industry is all about desire. The first time I saw a diamond, I fell in love, but I've never fallen out of love. It's the love of my life now, jewellery. And that moment, I realised I just wanted to be close to it, and I wanted to help it progress and evolve. And jewellery is so good at creating desire. Can we, in that conversation about desire, inject what needs to be done to move us on? Because everyone wants to do something, but I think a lot of people aren't sure what to do next. And I think it all comes down to desire. How do we get the message that jewellery is going to change your life? How do we inject that message with the ability and the need to move the whole conversation on to responsible practice and sourcing?
So I'm going to ask you a question now, whilst you've got the microphone. So the RJC is recognised as standardising or offering standards on responsible chains of custody, well-defined codes of practice. How do you think they are received and understood by the consumer, given what you've just said? And is that, you kind of already implied it, but is it all that's necessary to build trust? Because what you're talking about is desire and trust. If it isn't, what else is needed?
So for the first time in the last couple of months, we've had consumers going in and asking about the RJC to various places, which has been quite new for us. And I think there's a broadening awareness of what we are. And I'm hoping that I can help with that in terms of storytelling and in terms of broadening our approach about what we're here to do and how we're here to support members and actually ultimately inform the consumer about what they can do. So yes, consumers need to be asking the right questions, but also asking for jewellery which is responsible. And we all need to work together to make that happen, because it's all going to come from the consumers. They're the heart of everything we do, and we have to answer them when they ask us difficult questions. But I think, we're predominantly SMEs, our membership, and the SMEs, I think, are the lifeblood of the industry, and I would love to see SMEs and consumers have more interesting conversations about how they can move forward, because there's a real connection there. You're going into your family jeweller, you're going into the jeweller that you've been with for generations, and I'd love to see more conversations there about where things are sourced from, traceability, transparency. So I think the part we can play is we have a lot of educational resources available for free to consumers and to the membership. I would love us to have more conversations about learning, because I think we're all on this journey together.
Thank you. And you've mentioned that the role of the SMEs, and we're going to be talking about that, I think, with several people on this panel. But you also mentioned multi-generational family businesses, which leads me perfectly to a multi-generational family business. Edward, how, given your vast experience and having seen the industry and having a family that's been part of that industry for so long, how do you see this journey? How do you see these changes?
Thank you. Of course, I've seen enormous changes in my life, but in the diamond and jewelry industry in general. But let's look at what we are doing today. We all, with the people around us, have abstract theories of the goals and purposes of our organizations. But if you look at the panels now, it's very different from the people sitting here this morning. While all our organizations are preaching diversity, this morning, if we don't count the civil servant minister, we had 5 men on the stage and 1 woman in the leadership of the diamond and jewelry industry. Now, I know we all can agree that 1 Feriel Zerouki equals 5 men. So that was okay.
You're getting another comment.
But my question is, isn't what we do, what we tell, and how we gather in conventions and congresses like this too abstract? How do we translate this to the small people on the floor? To the goldsmiths, the gem cutters, the diamond people who do not represent the big organizations. And that's a matter of governance, and that's where my position in the responsible jewelry comes in, because we have continuously to find a balance between the small and medium enterprises and the big companies. And our industry, whether it's watch or jewelry or retail or diamond manufacturing, there are a lot of large companies that want really to be represented in every aspect that we do and how we develop the industry. But the majority of the Responsible Jewelry Council, 84% of our members are SMEs. And I come from that world. The problem that we face each time is not only keeping the balance, but it is also leave no one behind, as I always say. How do we translate the theory that we have developed together quite successfully into those on the floor who really have to do it? And for big companies, it can be easy to do something about the green energy that they use. And for small companies, they just get it, and it's more difficult. But they have also common denominators, like the human rights, like working on a responsible supply chain, whether that is through the World Diamond Council or the Responsible Jewelry Council, or with any other organizations. So there they can participate. But on the very high level, we sometimes forget ourselves what we are preaching.
Thanks. And I think that point about this is actually not about abstraction. It seems abstract when we're discussing it. And I think in climate, they spend way too much time talking about targets. It's when you start talking about how to reach the targets in practice that you get down to the actions. But Iris, I think you wanted a quick...
No, I think it's been also an interesting experience within the Watch and Jewelry Initiative 2030, because we have, leading brands and smaller enterprises. And I think a good example is, for example, on climate action, biodiversity. How do you start this journey, which is quite frightening? And, what are the best frameworks and what are the small steps to take? And I think we're very lucky because we are small, bold and courageous that we have this group that is very motivated with the CEOs to push it. But we are investing a lot in education. So we're really building tools, very small, practical tools to help the companies advance, because we believe if we can push those through in the wider network of the supply chain, that will be helpful. And I think it's also important, I have a great ambassador with the CEO of Cartier, Mr. Cyril Vigneron, that everything that we're building will be open source to the industry. So I think it's a matter of, sharing it with all of you, building upon it. Like we reference the good work that's being done on the table. I think it's super important not to reinvent the wheel and build on the good work that has happened for the past 10, 15 years.
Thank you. And that point, they're making this very easy because people are raising points that I think others can address on this panel. It brings me, sorry, you're way over there, so I'll try not to shout. But I think this issue of how do we facilitate progress, how do we build support for the SMEs, it's something that certainly the Sustainable Development Commission for CIBJO is very aware of, how to produce material guidance, reference points that may aid the whole industry and make sure it's not abstract, make sure it's practical steps. And one of the things I've been very pleased to witness is the work that my colleagues on the end have done for the Laboratory Grown Diamonds Commission regarding ESG principles, but actually they're how to put principles into practice, dare I say. I don't think that from what I've seen, the majority of that work is only specific to laboratory grown diamonds. I think actually it's broadly applicable. I've been very pleased and I'm going to be referencing it in the work going forward. But John or Helen, do you want to comment on your experience of defining that work? The work will be, I believe, presented on Thursday, so please mention that plug. Yeah, just the lessons learned, but also that issue of translating principles into practical steps.
Yeah, so it's really interesting listening to the opening comments from fellow panelists, and particularly how you've each tried to frame what ESG is and the various contents of ESG. And it very quickly becomes quite bewildering for large businesses, for individuals, for SMEs. And then some of you touched on the challenge of taking action and knowing what to do first. And then some comments around SMEs in particular and small businesses and how do they start. So we were set the task by CIBJO to come up with a way of simplifying all of this into we were asked to reinvent the wheel, and we have a wheel. And our wheel is a way of communicating what is ESG. If you have to boil it down into, in our case, 14 elements, what are they? And it's actually very broad. So if I think about ESG, having been involved in this subject for 20 years now, and many people will remember this in the early days, ESG, certainly in the UK, was a catch-all. It was quite a random grouping of things that went into the annual report. Typically towards the back end, it took up half a page, and it was community things, and it was environmental things, and all of this was before the whole importance of climate change and ESG as we know it today had taken off. So it's become quite a mixture and hodgepodge of things. And many people have tried to simplify and order it. So we've done that now for the laboratory grown diamond industry, and we've found a way of putting, I'm just going to read from the wheel, but we've got climate action in there, energy efficiency, biodiversity, resource usage. We've got climate resilience, all in ESG. And then within the social element, we've got social responsibility, diversity and inclusion, customer transparency, welfare and human rights. And then within governance, topics around transparency again, responsible sourcing, climate leadership, innovation, measurement and reporting. So you'll get to know the wheel. There's still quite a lot in there. But what we've tried to do is to put together something that if you're an SME and you're told you need to think about ESG for the good of the value chain and the supply chain. Well, this is what it is. And then what we've done is we've tried to translate that into what are the definitions of those things, but most importantly, what do I do? So if I want to make a difference in taking action or energy efficiency, what are the 4 or 5 things that I can do? And that I can do in the next year or the next 6 months. So as we've been putting this together, one of the things we realized is it's very easy to come across as patronizing, actually. So we had statements like, you must act now, but of course everyone by now understands the challenges of climate change. So we've started using the phrases like continue to take action. Because SMEs are all different and they all have different focuses in the value chain, what we're not saying is that everyone has to try and do everything tomorrow and try and close all of the gaps. But what we're saying is pick 2 or 3 things in our wheel, make a difference. And I really like the point around stories, because everything I've said there is still quite, and I'm a consultant, but it's very consultant-y. What's so important is that all of that is translated into real SME. So if I take my SME, which is peripheral but sits somewhere in the value chain, the way I work, there's a small number of people operating globally. When we look at the wheel, there are things that we can do around making a difference to the broader value chain. So we'd love to talk more about this on Thursday. I'm probably stealing the show a little bit, but one of the things we've found as we've done that is it's very, very difficult to boil this down and to simplify it. But we've had a go, and hopefully that will help.
Helen, please. Do you want, again, I think I'm thinking of, you're relatively new to this industry, I think. And so certainly, I think, John, you're relatively new. So I'm just trying to understand what your impressions were and which of those impressions actually, you've already kind of said, get started, make it simple. But do you have any impressions that you think, that you, as part of producing this framework, that you kind of would like to impart, basically, for the audience about how to get started, what makes it simpler?
So thank you for the question. Let me come to that. Last night at the Fabulous Dinner, I was asked a really important question, which was, what have we really learnt from the pandemic? And we all sat at the table thinking about this, and we went quiet for a moment. And the answer that I felt was most important, the lesson that we learned, was the value of people. That it's our relationships that we learned, that came into sharp focus. And, we've heard today about the vital importance, when we're talking about sustainability, of not leaving anyone behind. And so when we developed the principles that John's just talked about, through that process, we interviewed SMEs, we talked to participants in the laboratory-grown diamond industry. It was very clear that we needed to provide a helpful starting point to enable everyone to go on the journey to become more sustainable, and that we're not all on the same place in this journey. Some people are yet to start, many are already along the journey. And so what we wanted to do was to look at what are those core components that every company needs to think about. And in these terribly challenging times for businesses, it is so easy to push out this vital subject with immediate priorities like survival, like the cost of costs shooting up, like the issues with lack of, talent shortages, with recruitment issues and so on, particularly in the UK, but shared across other countries. And, there are three things in life. Some people will have heard me say this already this week. There are three certainties in life. One is taxes, two is death, and three is ESG legislation. There is a lot coming. And so every business needs to get ready for what's to come. And what we wanted to do with the principles was particularly help SMEs to understand what are the core components, what are the steps, what are the actions, some of which do not cost anything extra to what is done today, that will help get ready for that legislation and also move along that journey to net zero.
Thank you, and I'm relieved we're not talking about taxes and never mind death. Professor Cappellieri, I'm also aware that to make change, we have to consider structural change, we have to consider innovation. And I know that you have a passionate interest in looking at innovation, looking at new technology, looking at artificial intelligence, both as a negative and possibly a positive. Do you have any insights on how new technology, advanced innovation might support this journey?
Thank you so much, John. And let me start thanking CIBJO first, Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, for having me here, but especially for connecting the dots of this industry. Jewelry is a very complex system. Jewelry is very fragmented, and we all here look at jewelry from very different perspectives. And I've heard about change, about the journey. Edward and Iris were mentioning what we can do. And I think that we are all looking for transparency, responsibility, sustainability. But how can we reach transparency, sustainability, and responsibility without starting from the young generation, without investing in education? This is not a very generous industry towards education. And I'm very sorry to notice this. At Politecnico di Milano, I'm not sure you all know Politecnico, is one of the biggest international university, the biggest Italian one. It's a public university in the design sector. We are the 5th design university in the world, the only public. And my first lesson, I used to ask to my student, what is jewelry for you? Which are the most relevant aspects of jewelry for you? And they simply don't know. And they don't know because our industry does not invest in education. We did a huge survey about young generation, which kind of jewelry they will buy, which kind of jewelry they like. And the results were really surprising. So our diamonds, our beautiful gemstones, they will create amazing creations, contributing to the beauty of the world. And one of the main problems I see in the jewelry field is that sometimes it is very controversial. Is it art or investment? Is it beauty or business? How can we connect these different aspects? And one of the reasons why I'm very grateful to CIBJO is because we are here talking about this. At Politecnico, we are doing an extensive research on the use of artificial intelligence and digital technologies applied to jewelry. I'm aware This is not a very interesting aspect, especially for those who consider jewelry just from the craftsmanship perspective. But we cannot disconnect craft from innovation. And I'm pretty sure that in the next future, the responsible sourcing, creativity, production must be aware of technologies. Artificial intelligence is not a miracle, but it will be a new mindset and a new attitude we must consider too. Of course, in terms of sustainability, there are many, many problems. I'm pretty sure every one of you has had the conversation with ChatGPT asking, please write something, who I am, what my company is famous for. Do you know that any average conversation we do with ChatGPT consumes 1 bottle of water? Did you know that, let me give you the exact numbers, in Iowa, where the open artificial intelligence is based, the water consumption increased in the last 2 years of 34%. That means 1.7 million gallons of water, like 2,500 Olympic pools. Is it sustainable? I'm not sure. But according to McKinsey, in the next 5 years, companies will take advantage and will earn from 1.3 to 2 billions in terms of supply chain. And from the Politecnico perspective, blockchain technologies plus digital technologies with artificial intelligence, we can provide and change, talking about change, different things, starting from sourcing to the supply chain. And in my opinion, artificial intelligence will have a seminal role also in the co-creation, co-manufacturing, and especially for the after-sale and the retail's narrative support and esteem. So yes, John, I think that in the next future, we will see big changes.
John?
Thank you. Melanie, go ahead. Please.
I just wanted to leap in because you were talking about if jewellery is art or investment. And I just wanted to say, I think it's both. And I think sustainability has to be part of the value proposition to be absolutely in the mix. Because we can't have jewellery without art, and we can't have it without the investment currency, economics. So if we can get the conversation as part of the value of jewellery, that's where it's going to come, I think, the progress.
Sure, please.
Yeah, and just to add on what Melanie said, by 2025, the millennials and the Gen Z will be 70% of the luxury market. So if we're not even going to think then about, the rest that's coming, I think, again, it's a big risk for the industry. And we want to hear more from you.
Thank you. Whenever I ask a question about AI, I'm always mindful of the fact that in 1990, I did a degree in AI and was wholly unemployable because of that. It's taken 30 years to see that grow and flourish, but now it's a mainstream technology, I think it's fair to say. So somewhere down the line, that mainstream technology will come into play, just as digitization will come into play, I think, in tracing and tracking and traceability. Several of the points you made, I think, Melanie, your point alludes to or speaks to this issue that we are often talking about luxury. And I'm looking at you, Feriel, because I think the diamond industry has done quite a lot in terms of responding or changing the discussion around what luxury is. And for anybody who's heard me speak before, I often bang on about industries need to sort of consider reinventing themselves to discuss openly this idea of purpose and value creation. I think the diamond industry has done a lot there. Do you want to comment on that issue of wider value creation and a sense of purpose?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that, John. I think luxury is defined by the consumer. You know, luxury in the past, when I was growing up, used to be about status. We would open up magazines and look at superstars jumping off yachts, etc. That was luxury. The jewellery that they were wearing, that was luxury. Now we look at very important influencers, not on their super yachts, but actually working with initiatives that support their values. And I think values now will determine the value of your product. So when you're talking about sustainability, you're defining what your product represents. Now, nobody can do all 17 sustainable development goals and deliver. Not one company can do that, large or small. And as you've experienced how difficult it is, and your role was to simplify it, right? How difficult it was to just look at it and simplify it, and that's your role, let alone someone who's a small business trying to figure all of this thing out that is relatively new, because it used to be about CSR, then it was about responsible sourcing, now it's all of a sudden it's about sustainability. I was trying to look for the definition of sustainability, couldn't really find it defined anywhere. The goals were, but the actual term. So I think that purpose and values are the new status of luxury. And I think we can't disconnect large businesses from small, or the formal sector from the informal sector. And I'll explain my thinking process with that. And also make just one or two comments about what you've said, which I totally agree with, but we're on a journey. So all informal product ends up in formal supply chains. I hope we can agree on that. And all large players source or supply small players. Hence, the connectivity is extremely important. The Sustainable Development Goals need to be viewed with a view of equality. And I often hear people in panels talking about equality, and we must, and we should, and you must. But you can't talk about equality if you're not talking about equity. Let me explain that to you. I'm relatively short. Melanie is taller than me. If me and Melanie bought tickets to the same concert, we would pay the same price, we both have access to the tickets, we should have the same view. We get to the concert, Melanie has an amazing view, and my view is obstructed. So I've paid the same amount, I've tried to do the same thing for the same experience, but it wasn't equal, even though it seemed it was equal. What I needed for it to be fair and equal is a booster, so that I can have the same view as Melanie. That is equity. You cannot talk about equality without focusing on equity. And so, as we develop all these amazing solutions, we're dealing with small players, informal players, large players. One size does not fit all. You cannot demand your view, your lens on everyone else. You need to be ethical. Remember, we said responsible, move to ethical. Be ethical with your supply chain, large and small. Understand the cultural aspects. Understand how they can actually do good. I can develop blockchain technology. We have. De Beers was one of the first ones through Tracer. Can I expect that from everyone else to join, small players? People that are in the artisanal mining sector, off the grid? Can I expect that? Can I demand it? Or can I develop boosters to get them on their journey so that they can also have access to the same tools and play on an equal playing level field? That is equality. So please, when you speak about equality, do consider equity, because you cannot deliver equality without it. And this brings me to the final point that I want to make. Luxury and the consumers that we're dealing with that are defining luxury for us really respect authenticity. Be authentic with your challenges, your truths. You're not good because someone else is bad. You're good because you're trying to do the best with what you can with the current challenges that we face. And true sustainability, a business that is truly sustainable, develops commercially sustainable initiatives that solve global challenges. Thank you.
I really love that concept of boosters, and if we could focus on identifying the boosters is a really useful focus, I think. Melanie, you wanted to say a few words.
Yeah, I was going to say luxury is an interesting concept. It's really the bridge between art and business, as we said before. We had a summit with the GIA and Harvard, at Harvard in June. And the thing that came out of that shocked me was we had 7 professors from Harvard and someone from MIT. We had scientists, artists, academics, industry. And somebody said, until we talk about poverty, we can't address any of this. Until we include the global south, we can't address any of it. And I'm really conscious that some conversations I have, those players aren't in the room, and they need to be. And so I think poverty is is the lump in the carpet, because so much of what we need to do, what's coming with climate change especially, and supply chains, the energy transition, a lot of it's going to be tied to what we can do about poverty.
John, do you want to say?
Just to build on that, Melanie, and to bring in a story, somewhere in your supply chains in Mozambique, there is a village, and in that village, the women have to walk, and it's always the women, unfortunately, but the women have to walk for 4 hours in the morning to collect firewood, to light the stove, to make the food, for the husbands to go to the mine, to go down the mine. And what's happening over there is really interesting because it combines technology with diversity, with inclusion, with sustainability. There are now cooking stoves that you can get, which are low carbon, which generate electricity to power your mobile phone, which mean that the women don't have to walk for 5 hours to get firewood in the morning, which mean that they can start their own business, which means that they can be educated, and their families can be educated, which means that they can learn about safety, and they can learn about health, and they can learn about sustainability, so that their husbands, and unfortunately it is husbands that are in the mine, can keep themselves safe, and they can build communities, and they can build businesses, and at some point they'll find their way into the Instagrams of the celebrities, and suddenly you have a totally different vision and image that puts all of this together in a way that actually before the pandemic, some of those things we wouldn't even have thought of. But this conversation we had last night about what we learned in the pandemic, the other thing we learned in the pandemic, that it's brought people much closer, the world's got much smaller. So one of the things that we've learned, coming back to your question, John, from earlier, that we've learned as we've been going through this exercise in this supply chain, and we see this in lots of other supply chains, is it's all so interconnected. someone's scope 1 emissions is someone else's scope 3, is someone else's scope 2. We're all in the same position, actually. And so it's all becoming interconnected in a way that it's never been before. And I think all of us are starting to explore some really exciting connections here that create huge opportunities. And I think the thing I've learned about this sector is probably you've got as many opportunities as any other sector, because you have people in your supply chain in Mozambique and in New York and everywhere else on the planet, across every social strata, every income level, every ethnicity. It's really exciting, actually, for this industry in a way that maybe it isn't in others.
Thanks. And I think that intersectionality, that overlap between, we often talk about climate, biodiversity, social equity in separate buckets, but your point is very well made. We often talk, for instance, about water. When there's water shortage that may be climate related, it's the women who generally go and get the water in many economies. That means that if they're young women, they're not being educated, it affects the whole social dynamic and opportunities. So you may think climate is a fairly remote thing to some people. It actually is not. It actually affects the social, all of the things you mentioned. Iris, I think you wanted a quick word.
No, well, when we talk about ending poverty, we know that it's a fact. If we uplift women into society, you know, when women thrive, humanity thrives. But I think one of the big learning curves that we've had for 1 year, we've worked with UN Women on a gender-responsive procurement tool that they wanted to launch. I wanted to understand, actually, when you look at a bigger brand and smaller enterprises and you really go through the network of all the companies, how can you see that women are really leading their business and that they have this independency? And just coming before on this panel, I was talking to Melanie. Indeed, you know, you need to give women the opportunity. They need to get the door opened. They need to be empowered, educated to be able to manage that. And this exercise has been an eye-opener for us, and I loved it. We had someone like Gucci and Cartier, Monica Vinader. We had smaller suppliers. We have the data now. Now we're looking at the gaps and shaping a tool just to even understand, because we know if we can get more women in entrepreneurial roles, that will also contribute to economic empowerment. And I think that's also key for our industry, where 90% of behavior is influenced by women. And I think we have an additional duty to care and do this right.
Thank you. But I want to go back to my question to Feriel about this idea of luxury, value and purpose. I mean, has, in your experience of the diamond industry and your family's experience, is that something that is front of mind to you, that sense of the purpose of the family business?
I think that has a lot to do with emotion. It's emotion of the consumer. And that's exactly where I wanted to go, because all of us here in the room we have asked ourselves, these subjects we are discussing, is this push or pull? Are we pushing it from our organizations, from our governments, from our international organizations, into the market, or is the consumer asking us about the provenance of a piece of jewelry or gold or a colored stone? And I find that is not so easy to answer. But I can give you an example from my experience when I was still at the World Diamond Council and we were having a Kimberley process meeting. And we were talking about human rights. And one of the leaders of an African producing country stood up and said, you, white Europeans or Americans, are not going to tell us, African countries, what to do. Those days are behind us. At first I found it shocking, and when I was thinking about it, I thought, well, actually he is right. But that is exactly not what we want to do. So we came back with the example of the consumer confidence. The consumer confidence in many countries want to know that the piece of jewelry that they buy, not only for their own love of life and emotion, but that it has been doing good through the whole pipeline of the production, including whether it's a producing country in Mozambique, where there are little diamonds, or in a big producing country. It goes for everything we do. And if the consumer is asking that, it is convincing with those arguments that we can go to the suppliers, to the producers of colored stones, of gold and of diamonds, and say, this is what we have to do. Because if we cannot guarantee that this piece of jewelry is bringing happiness not only to the consumer, but to everybody in the pipeline, then we lose her or him, and we lose our industry. And that was an argument that is universal. And that is, like Helen said, now people ask me, and what is the goal of what you do? I say, there is nothing we can achieve. It is a journey of doing well with our industries, and whatever end of the industry we are. And step by step, we get there with the cooperation of the people who mean well to promote this, in the end, what is the consumer confidence, and that we translate in the love for beauty, for our other human beings, and for what we do.
Sorry, I was going, yes, please do.
Thank you so much, John, for raising the question about luxury. I would love to ask to every one of you what is luxury for you. And I'm pretty sure that, I don't know, 300 people, so I have no idea how many people is in the audience, every answer would be different. We can look at luxury from very different perspectives. Luxury can be a traditional idea of richness and wealthy, a Ferrari, a super yacht, superfood, whatever you want. On, as a contemporary idea, could be knowledge. And this is what I noticed very recently in the most important luxury groups of jewelry. We provide education also in terms of PhD program for LVMH, Kering Group, Richemont Group, and Chanel. And they do not ask us only the best designs, they do ask to educate young people to a new idea of luxury. But luxury cannot be universal. Luxury is related to age, to country, to what you have seen in your life, how many books you have read. So, how can we educate in the same way people with very different backgrounds? This is the reason why we need to have the tools to decode luxury. For many, luxury are just related to the products. The best diamonds, the best gemstones, the best metals. But for some other people, luxury is related to knowledge and accordingly is related to the experience. This is the reason why right now the arena for the best jewelry is based on the design of the experience, especially for the retail.
Thanks. I'm just going to, can we stay with you for a second? I'm going to ask you another question. It's regarding you kind of touched upon it, and you touched upon it also in the conversation around technology and AI, but there is an aspect, I guess, of sustaining skills. We talked, we're in the center of ancient skills. And the question, I guess, is, do you have a position or an opinion on sustaining skill sets? You mentioned creating opportunities for youth. Do you have any perception or opinion on the balance between moving to new technologies and sustaining skills? It's only tangential to this conversation, but it's really important when we talk about employment and how employment changes. And creating opportunity. So I just wondered if you had anything to add there.
This is an amazing question. Thank you so much. I believe in beauty. And my belief in beauty is not just related to the aesthetics of people or of products. The lesson I have learned from the Italian design is that the masters of the Italian design, they were able to design new behaviors related to new products. That is my wish for jewelry. I wish to see in the future next generation trained to beauty in terms of products, but also in terms of behaviors. Responsibility, transparency, sustainability are related to the beauty of behaviors, of human beings. We need to teach to our young generation to be valuable human beings. And everything will come. But, and this is really for the best of our industry, please believe more in education and support education even in the jewelry industry.
Thank you. So, I'll come to you in a second, Iris, but one of the things I've heard, and I've heard it many times, that the industry has already made a lot of progress, certainly in parts. The world needs to make a lot more progress. One of the things that's sometimes lacking is consistent or coherent communication. Melanie, you said about storytelling. How do we tell this story? Even when we were talking about data last night, somebody said, how do we tell the story of how to translate data analysis into action? And I'm very mindful of that communications point. Before I come to Iris, Melanie, do you want to just comment on that, given your background?
I mean, coming from The Economist, obviously that's the point of progression, really. Data is a language in itself, just like design is a language. But for some people, it feels a bit overwhelming, and we have to break it down and give somebody one or two big numbers that shock them. You know, everyone in this room has been somewhere and they've heard a figure. The thing that shocked me recently was that global emissions that come out of sub-Saharan Africa is 1%. That floored me, because I keep reading things in the papers where everyone says to Africa, bring your global emissions down. And then global emissions for Europe and America is half. So somewhere along the line, we're not getting that figure. We're not understanding it. We're sort of, it's a bit of an abstraction technique of not addressing what we have to do in Europe and America to tackle our emissions. It's easy to tell someone else to do something. So one piece of data can change your perception of reality. And I would love us to use data in this industry in a much better way. I've, as a journalist, found it hard to get to data about jewellery. Often it's in private hands. There's not like an open data source where you can just go and get interesting information. I would love to see that change.
Thanks. Iris, I think you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Melanie said. I think that credible data is important, and we talked about luxury, and we talked about Feriel. You mentioned authenticity. I think our industry, we are very privileged to work in an industry where I think authenticity and integrity is at the heart of the business. So if we're making claims of our products, we have to be very careful. And, you know, it's not because I'm saying it, because, you know, we have these regulations that are now into place, and there's already a lot of issues around those regulations on green claims, blue washing, SDG washing, whatever. So it is not a perfect journey. And I always am very worried when I see a sustainability report and people are telling me that they are fully sustainable. I don't understand how you can be fully sustainable in an imperfect world. So I think one is we need data, and I agree with Melanie, we need to have an integrated data system somewhere where we capture data of the industry. The good things we're doing, you know, where do we need to focus on as an industry? Because I think we confuse there, yeah. And second is, I think we need a methodology. So when we look at ESG, There are international frameworks out there. Again, let's not reinvent the wheel, build on it, but indeed, connect it in small pieces so that everyone is inclusive on the journey. And I think that will bring a lot of goodwill to the industry, also towards reputation.
Thank you. Feriel, you wanted to?
Thanks. Yeah, I think this conversation is very interesting. I mean, one thing is data and the other thing is storytelling. And as you mentioned, there's two things we could be sure of, death and regulation. So large businesses at the bookends of the industry, no regulation is coming and they need to be reporting. They've already started reporting. So the ask, many times I'm in panels and I'm talking about consumer demand and we know consumers care about provenance and they care about ethics and they care about, and lots of people raise their hand and say, hey, I'm at the consumer side, I'm a retail, I'm a brand, nobody's asking me these questions. So I think it clicked for me at that stage, which is, yes, we know it's coming, okay, but why are we asking for it now? It's because we need to be reporting. So the questions that are coming up the supply chain, why people are saying it's really important, I need this data, etc., is the reporting needs of the bookends and the larger people in the industry who are connected to the smaller guys. So the smaller businesses may think they don't need to report and legislation won't impact them, but it will because they are suppliers of the product or of a trade to that large player. And so this booster that I keep talking about, this equity that you need to do to bring people along with you, even if you may be ahead, well done for you, you need to bring people along with you in order to help them in that journey, because you can't succeed on your own. So data first, because we need to report, stories later, when consumers do ask. And we genuinely have such a beautiful story to tell. So we shouldn't be doing this because of legislation. We're formalizing it because of legislation. But thank goodness we're finally not scared to tell the beautiful story of jewellery.
Thanks. Actually, I was going to come to you anyway, so it's perfect, because I was going to say, you guys, presumably, there's a couple of aspects. You've worked with a lot of different sectors, a lot of different industries. And so you must have come across, one, a lot of data, I hope, and how to communicate and translate that data into communications that are meaningful. Do you want to comment?
So when we were doing the consultation process for the development of the ESG principles, it was an overriding theme in those conversations about how do we talk about our sustainable journey, our actions, our activities. You're absolutely spot on that it does start with data. I would add also that needs to be externally assured. That is best practice, and that is something that we should all be aiming for. I think, so how we approach that with regard to the CIBJO ESG principles for laboratory-grown diamonds was to look at, well, if you are truly sustainable, if you are on a journey to net zero, how do I know that I'm doing the right thing? What does good look like? And at what point can I talk about what I'm doing with confidence that is backed up by data and by external assurance? And so when we developed the principles, we looked at, well, if you want to know where you are on that journey and you want to understand what is included in a report, what are those elements? And so we built those into the principles. So you can look at them and say, okay, am I doing this? How am I looking at water? How am I looking at energy? How am I looking at the gender diversity within my businesses? And then you can report on it. And so if you're not doing those things, you shouldn't be calling yourself sustainable or eco or environmentally friendly. And I think, those stories get woven from that evidence base. And that's really, really vital.
I think the evidence base on which you can make a credible claim is absolutely key, John.
Just a really quick point as well, based on other industries and other sectors. So Helen and I have worked in transportation and mining and retail and all sorts of other sectors. The themes that you're all talking about here are not uncommon. You know, this is not just this industry. Everybody's finding this really difficult. And topics like data exist in every sector. So I know shipping particularly well. And I'd say, just to build on data being important, it's also about the mindset. So in shipping is not an industry of data. It's an industry of stories. For hundreds and hundreds of years, it's all about stories. And they struggle with getting their head around measurement and attaching action to data. And that's really what we're talking about here, is how is what I'm doing having an impact? How can I measure it? And how can I use that to demonstrate to others that I'm making an impact? And then the feedback loop. And it's right at the heart of every sector, including this one.
Thank you. I'm mindful of time. We don't have that much time, but we really would like to throw it open to the floor if any of you have any questions. I mean, I could carry on talking all day, but I'm sure you don't want that to happen. So please, if you have any questions, if you could raise your hand. There are some mics around the room. I don't know who's got the mics, but you certainly have mine. Okay. We hope there was mics. Do you want to take this one?
I'm Krishna Goyal, representing GJPC, a board member, and having a jewelry business, of course. My question is to Professor Alba Cappellieri. What is the definition of luxury and beauty is being taught at Milano Politecnico? And there's one more. You did mention that a question asked on ChatGPT consumes 1 bottle of water, you know. So how do you want to mitigate, because water is natural resources. As you rightly said, that the consumption has also gone up by 34%. So how the technology and nature will go hand in hand?
Thank you so much for your questions. Let me start from the second one, which is the easiest one. So regarding water, a very recently research, they started from the consuming of water in the Iowa state, and farmers were very upset with OpenAI for the consuming of water. So I have no idea what we can do for this, but my point is that when we ask ChatGPT who I am, we must be aware that in that moment we are consuming a bottle of water. And we also must be aware that digital technologies are important, will improve the wealth of our companies, but also have a cost in terms of sustainability. So I think we should try to find a good balance between the environmental and the benefits we can receive from digital technologies. Going back to the idea of luxury, I wrote a book on luxury, and I do lectures on luxury for many brands. And my first point was that from the Renaissance, Italy has always been one, if not the first, producers of beauty and of luxury items. If you go back to the Renaissance, there were wonderful jewelry, wonderful textiles, beautiful dresses, and so on. So then, especially during the 18th century, the leadership of France came over the Italian leadership. And I asked myself, why? And I realized that the reason why France became, in the 18th century, and still is, the main country for luxury, is due to the support of the government. The king, with his governor, whose name was Colbert, they supported all the local manufacturing companies, starting from laces, embroidery, jewelry as well. And there was a very strong support from the government side of these enterprises. It's a very simple model. So, I think that we need luxury, and we need luxury in terms of beauty, in terms of education, even though we cannot afford all this beautiful creation. But luxury has a very seminal educational role towards beauty. This is the reason why I'm asking to the most important luxury groups to support education. And they do, to be honest with you, so this is a good sign. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We had a question, sir.
Thank you, John. Am I audible?
Yes,
yeah.
you're fine.
Anil Sankhwal from GJEPC. I'm on the board in representing Studded Jewellery. I've heard a lot about responsible sourcing, how from across the chain we should be aware of that. But what I find missing, that nobody is talking about educating a client, educating customers. Until the client demands what we have to do, we will never become responsible. We are traders, dealers, retailers. We all try to sell, we do business. But to make us more responsible, somebody has to pull us and tell us, yes, we need this, is our right. And unfortunately, across the board, no matter which organization, which association I talk, I only hear about responsible sourcing. We are aware of that. More and more we get aware of it when you come and tell us all these things. But please, John, it is for all the panelists and the people here that we have to now come to a point where we can educate our clients and tell them, well, this is your right, this you should get, and you should learn what to ask for. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think it's a really good point. I think a lot of industry participants have waited for consumer-led demand on issues. The question is, how educated does the consumer need to be to drive demand? And do you need to act anyway, or do you need to act to communicate to your consumer? But I absolutely agree, it's in transition. Melanie, you wanted to say a word?
I was going to say that basically storytelling is a combination of education and the brand's journey. And so rather than kind of wait to be pulled by the demand, I think the jewellery industry often looks inward and we now have to look outward. We have to push out. And that means sometimes starting the storytelling around these topics, even if you don't see a need for it now, because a need is coming. And we have to start doing any one of us now, like Instagram, for example, is the biggest sales tool for jewellery globally. Any one of us can start a free account and just start telling our stories to our clients, to the industry, to the world about what we need to do next and about what we are doing now. So there are lots of free tools out there which combine education and knowledge that we can do today with no cost. You just got to start. And to the point about young people, this is what they do. This is the world they live in. They are in that global digital world. Get someone young to do that for you. You know, run the business, do the things you need to do, but there's a whole gamut of skills out there, young people especially, who are waiting, who are better at it than all of us, who can get your story and get this information out there in a really great way that it can be understood.
Thank you. And I think from CIBJO's point of view, I can put words in Gaetano's mouth, which is a dangerous thing to do, but I think it's safe to say that that is an aspiration to provide that support. It is a move from responsible sourcing to sustainability. I think we all recognize that. So supporting the industry, I think, is definitely an ambition of CIBJO. We are running very short of time. We started a bit late, so I'm going to take a risk and go for a 5-minute overrun. But if we can't have the questions, we can all talk over lunch. One question in the front, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I couldn't have asked for a better cue in talking about communication. My name is Raluca Angel. I represent the Natural Diamond Council. For the ones that you don't know, we're the industry body tasked with the category marketing for diamonds. We talk to consumers 365 days a week, so a year. And Melanie, to your point, to your point, absolutely, you need to be on all of the social media platforms, and we're there. We cover the entire globe, so we're on any social media platform you can imagine. We contextualize everything to each industry, each market, and absolutely we can tell you that we are communicating everything that, to Feriel's point, the industry has been doing for such a long time. We do that, we package everything into campaigns, and we're absolutely happy to help anybody here that is interested. I'll be here until Thursday. I can present a lot of the initiatives that we've started. The Thank You, by the Way campaign is something that we've started alongside the RJC, where we are basically thanking each and every consumer that has decided to invest in a piece of jewelry that contains natural diamonds. We are talking about the impact that they actually had in the producing communities and beyond. But what I actually wanted to just say is, once data is collected, actions are being set, the way we talk about all of the sustainability action is very important. And legislation is here with regards to greenwashing. So I do think there is a very, very big risk into pushing so much out there, being extremely excited to communicate about what we do. We fall in the other side. And we shouldn't do that, because as an industry, we already do a lot. We don't need to exaggerate. We need to walk the talk and be careful how is it that we walk. And we're here to support in any possible way. And thank you for the panelists for sharing your views.
Thank you. I don't think that was quite a question, but thank you anyway. I think we do have time to squeeze one more question in, if I'm allowed. So I think there was a question at the front.
Hi everyone. I'm Jen Heebner. I'm here representing Rappaport, the American Gem Trade Association, the Culture Pearl Association. My question is for Iris and Alba. You both mentioned education. It seems we have tons of incredible groups that provide education, but when you talk about we need more education, what do you mean on the consumer side, in the trade? What do you see, where do you see a need for more education?
I think all sides, actually, because we need to continue to accelerate. But I would start, if we look, and I'm just speaking now on behalf of the Watch and Jewelry Initiative, when we have looked at the extended network of some of the brands that are part of our initiative. And what, for example, one of the first key components that came out was that they wanted more education on, for example, a topic like operationalization of human rights. Now, why? I think it's quite obvious. You know, there's the European Commission, new regulations that is not yet in place is coming, that's going to connect to human rights and climate. So for example, that's one topic. So I think there's a lot of what I would call the more deep dive topics, like human rights due diligence, OECD due diligence, all the more complicated topics. But I think in general also introduction to what sustainability means, step-by-step actions, but also I think in a different way of educating. I don't believe anymore in sitting in front of your screen and going through a digital portal. That's one thing, to get the basics right. But I think what we see is that the SMEs need a safe space to learn. So the model is like this. They will get certain education packages. They will be able to digest it, I would say. And then they will have a safe help desk support and space to engage with actually homework to do. So when the output is there, that they have some concrete things that they can do. So I would say, coming back to your question, I think education on sustainability, on the broader topics, and also I think on more broadly the topic of transparency and responsibility that we all have. And going back to the point of Raluca, I think the biggest risk today for the industry is if one company goes into disrepute, it hits the whole industry. And I'm sorry, that's a shared responsibility, and we are all accountable for that. So I think it's a very serious responsibility that we need to take.
So can we keep it to 1 minute? Sorry, because we are over time. It's okay.
Thank you so much for your question. It's very, very important. Let me start saying that Politecnico is the only university where jewelry is taught at university level in Italy. And Italy is one of the most important jewelry producers in the world. Furthermore, is it jewelry in the field of education be based on science, on the arts? This is a problem because are completely different approaches. Politecnico is a research university. We approach jewelry in terms of research and innovation, but at the same time, we cannot forget the anthropological importance of jewelry in terms of humanistic. So, my hope and my wish is that the jewelry industry will promote education after a debate on the basis and the pillars we really need. Because vertical approaches in terms of, for example, we do have a PhD program together with Stanford on metallurgic sustainability. That's amazing,
Alba,
but it's just one of the parts, sorry. So let's talk about this. And this is also the reason why I think that it would be amazing if CIBJO could start a table on education.
We are well over time. Thank you for your patience and tolerance for my bad time management. I'd like to thank all of the panelists. I think that was an extraordinarily rich conversation. As you can tell, we could carry on the conversation for hours. Hopefully we can over lunch, but thank you all very much. Thank you.
Check. I would request our moderator, the speakers, to please be here with us. We have a gesture of love, or I could say token of appreciation for giving your time today. I am requesting you to please be here with us. And while requesting our president, CIBJO, to please join us on the stage, Cappellieri, to please take over the stage. Mr. Pramod Agrawal, sir, the Vice President, India, CIBJO and Chairman, NGJCI, and Mr. Thomas, GIA Executive Vice President, the Chief Laboratory and Research Officer, to please take over the stage. There is a small gesture of love, or I could say there is a memento that we really want to present to the speakers and the moderator on the stage. So I request each one of you to please be here with us. We have a gesture of love, we call it memento, to present to you all. I request you to please be here with us, and the president as well to please take over the stage. So please. Yeah, requesting Mr. Pramod Agrawal sir to please join us on the stage. Mr. Pramod Agrawal, sir. And Mr. Tom Moses as well to please be a part. Mr. Tom Moses. Hi. Would request you to please take this over. Music. Yes. I requested you all to please be here. We are going to present you the felicitation. There is a memento to be given to all the speakers. I request you to please bring them all together.
Thank you. Thank you to my...
Yeah. Requesting each one of you to please face the camera and requesting Pramod sir, Tom and our president to please take over and give this gesture. Yes. This is a beautiful memento that is supposed to be given to all the speakers and the moderator today with us. We'll be giving a picture too. So you might be curious what is there in that bag, right? This is what we are providing as in memento. This is a gesture of, I could say, appreciation, a gesture of love that they are here for the day. Say cheese, I could say. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here, for all your time. Thank you so much. This is gonna be the lunch break now, but I really want to see you all back here at 1:45 so that we can begin the next session on time. Thank you so much, everyone.